Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 567 of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Easy, and I'm joined by my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, the Mason.
Hey, how you doing?
And of course, everyone's favorite smiler, Abe Stein.
You know, it's funny that I knew that first thing was not a read for me. I knew it was.
Well, it rhymed
Hey.
with the M's. The M's went together.
Every Sherlock needs its Holmes, you know what I'm saying, dude? And Holmes is a very popular character.
See, here's no, Mason. It's not anything like that. It's just that I know that while I am a man and a myth, I'm not a legend.
Yeah. It's all the League of Legends is rubbing off on me.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, I've never been in the Rift,
Yeah.
so I can't be a legend.
That's
we
unfortunately
were talking about free to play games on my other podcast, and I was like, I never really got into League of Legends. I played a lot of Dota in like the StarCraft 2 servers or the
Mhm.
Warcraft 3 servers, but like I never like did the like when it was like when everyone was bad and it was like a mod. So
Mhm.
it's really funny to see how that game has grown. We aren't going to talk too much about Dota or League today, unless Mason has a really cool always improving moment. Instead, we are going to talk about pivoting. This is something that comes up in games of Magic more and more as games get condensed and role assignment changes throughout the games. But the thing that I want to talk about is kind of the idea of pivoting and what it kind of looks like, and how to break it down. And, you know, during our podcast meeting, I pitched a different episode, and these guys convinced me to do this one, and I'm happy that they did, because I got to think about it a lot this week. And I think that pivoting breaks down to a constant role assessment, where you are doing it all the time, and then electing the opportune time to change roles. Is there anyone that disagrees with that summarization of pivoting, or that wants to add to it? No, we're good. I love it.
I mean, I've always thought about like pivoting as. Actually, I wrote right before I started writing for Starseed. I'd written a blog post about why at the time I was playing Jeskai Control, that for longtime fans of I say longtime fans, I guess it was like 6 or 7 years ago now, but I remember like the Cryptic Command Snapcaster Mage Jeskai deck. Like I elected to play that deck a lot because I felt like it was a deck that once it had pivoted from being like on the defensive to pressing its advantage, it was really decisive in kind of controlling the flow of the game in a lot of matchups. And I think like pivoting is really identifying, when is that most opportune time to step on the gas. Like that's how I always have thought about it. I don't know.
No, I love that. I love that. I think about the standard Gen deck and how it was basically the control deck of the Farseek deck, for those who don't know what I'm talking about. And like, it was the control deck unless you were on the play, or unless you flipped a Bonfire of the Dam, in which case you're like, oh, suddenly I'm not the control, like I'm now the aggressor, right? Like, and those are key pivotal things for like one deck, whether it be tap down your thing and now the clock changes with Cryptic Command, or flip a Bonfire of the Damned in Standard. Like there are moments that you can identify, but then there are the ones that you can't. And I hope to kind of flesh out those in this one. Mason, any thoughts on that?
No, not really. I think pivoting is like a pretty self-explanatory topic, but is deep to talk about, if that makes sense. Like I don't think the definition is one that's going to confuse a lot of people.
I hope so. Let's talk about where to start. And I did these show notes a little bit differently than I normally do, because I feel like the topic's so broad that I wanted to just be like a conversation. But I wanted to talk about like, where do you start? Like, and this isn't where to start to learn to pivot. This is where do you start in role assessment in a lot of ways, because that's kind of where pivoting can even begin, right? Because you have to go from one role to another. And the first thing that came to my mind was matchup. Like, And then secondary to that, I'd like to include it, is open deck lists. Mason, you have a pretty, one of my favorite quotes that you have on the podcast outside of open deck lists is how much information do you gain and how quickly by what your opponent's doing. What does this mean? What can I put my opponent on within these sequence of turns and within this level of information? And that is really interesting because that dictates a lot on how you should present a game plan.
Yeah, I mean, especially in formats like Standard, I think, where even though the range of potential cards to play is very high, the mana is very telling, right? Like in Modern, your opponent plays a a Misty Rainforest. That could be a breeding pool. It could be like a blue-green deck, but it could also be any blue or any green deck, right? Until they fetch, you're not exactly sure. But even then, we're talking turn one, end of your turn one, start of their turn two, you probably have a good idea of what they're on exactly. And in Standard, this can be as early as turn one a lot of the time. And you can have a lot of accuracy if you're well versed on the format. And I do think it is one of the more important parts of like pivoting. Well, not exactly understanding the match up per se, but understanding what they are playing roughly allows you to kind of figure out what kind of game plan you actually want to be playing and how you want to go about engaging in this game.
Yeah, I think that like it starts role assessment in a really defined way if you have the understanding that Mason's talking about. And then open deck lists does it even more. So if you're playing in an RC or another turn with open deck lists, you even get more information. You're like, okay, I actually know my role, and then you can actually look at your opening hand and develop your plan from there. Now you can't do that in the flip side. I want to cover that. Like on the flip side that Mason's talking about, where you have to see what they're doing initially. You just need to have a good game plan and a plan for your role game one, and then adjust from there. But if you have an open deck list, you actually know what your role should be in the matchup and can define that. Or games 2 and 3, things like that.
And I think it's funny you said like you kind of know based on the open deck list, like that, even to the point of it's constant. Like that kind of tells you, like you look at your deck list and you know what deck you registered and what your deck list looks like. Then you know what theirs is. You still, let's say your opening hand is one that lends itself to being more proactive and trying to take the initiative, and rather than playing a more reactive game, if that's maybe not what the matchup dictates. I think like a good example would be if you're playing Dimir Frog, and like depending on what your hand looks like, some games you just have a turn 2 frog after a turn 1 interactive spell, and that hand is just really good looking, right? Like you're not going to mulligan that hand. So maybe even if the matchup is one where typically you're not trying to apply pressure early, you might just have been dictated by the hand you have to try to play a more play a more proactive role than maybe you would in the matchup on paper. I think it's important to like, to your point, it's important to know what do I generally want to do, because it informs, even what land you might play on turn 1, or what spell you might cast on turn 1, or even what kind of hand you might keep. But the hand you keep also dictates it, right? Like it's something that constantly evolves over the course of the game.
I also think like the range of hands that you might keep might dictate like if I know my deck, right? Like I'm going to use your frog example. Like if I have Thoughtseize, Frog, Force, right? And like Force backup, I'm going to keep that hand in most matchups, regardless of whether or not I'm supposed to be the aggressive seat, right? Like, because like that just gives me like opportunities to pivot more times, and also puts my opponent in probably an uncomfortable situation. And understanding that and knowing that that's your starting point, I think to me is like kind of a key point before you can even start to pivot. You have to know where you're starting. So how do we assess from here? I think it's really hard to go from like maybe it's not hard, it's nebulous to go from like my opening hand in the matchup to like onboard stuff, but that is what ends up happening. eventually in a match of Magic, somebody's assigned a role, right? Mason, how do you know what role you're assigned?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends on your deck and the matchup at hand, and a lot of work before the tournament starts, right? Like Abe was saying, obviously the hand you sometimes you'll draw a hand when you're supposed to be more like traditionally you might think like the matchup is more one where you're reactive and you might have a hand that's more proactive. But generally speaking, you're kind of like thoughts before the tournament and deciding like, okay, this is the kind of role I theoretically want to take. That will dictate it generally speaking. And then as the game progresses, it's your job to solve the puzzle of like, is what I am drawing and slash my opponent's playing conducive to this game plan I pre-planned? If so, continue on, and if not, then adapt.
So I like that you talked about the draws because I think that's really important here. Additionally, like I think that like what a board state looks like might define this. And there are decks that like have very key pivoting turns, right? Like there are decks like control decks, like Abe you talked about Jeskai, right? Like there are decks like I mean I talked about Junda a little bit, but like even this blue black Dimir deck that we have in standard right now, like you know, it doesn't get a play defensively very often, but it needs to figure out when it gets to do that with its small creatures to hold down the board of X or Y. And like how we assess that is really important. And it's contextualized into what Mason said of like, okay, well I kept my opening hand, here's my plan. Here's how the first few turns played out. Where are we at now? What does the board look like? And what are the outcomes over the next few turns that could change that or influence both my decisions and my opponents? And this is something that when we had Alex Hanna on, he talked a lot about this in his first episode with us of like, this is like a superpower of like knowing when this will change will dictate how the game will play out, and if you are on the right side of that, you get a huge advantage.
Yeah, I think a lot about I think it was V Mefwitz's take on like who's the beatdown. Who's the beatdown? Obviously, a classic of evaluating your role in a game. But Zvi's take on it was that it's not actually about who is like the beatdown. It's about who has inevitability, right? If the game progresses at its current pace and its current state onward, who is going to win in the long run, right? With where things are now. And if the answer is that it's you, then odds are you are the one who is, content to spend resources kind of keeping the game in that way, which is usually the player I consider in the driver's seat, right? One who's being a bit more, I guess, and it really depends on the deck you're playing, but it is kind of trying to keep the game on the same trajectory. But if you're the one who's not, then you kind of need to be the player who's taking risks and trying to change the way that the board looks, right? You're trying to maybe make a risky play to alter that trajectory of the game. And when it comes to like, what does that mean for your role? I mean, sometimes just looking at boards, I think Frog is a great deck to think about this with. One of the best pieces of wisdom I got at all about playing against or with Frog is that there's really two ways to think about the deck. Is that there are turns where they have a threat in play, and there are turns where they don't. That makes it a really easy binary for a lot of decks to say, okay, are they trying to be like, are they the aggressor? Are they the ones who are taking the leading role? And that can be dictated by, are they attacking with a creature, right? If they have a Psychic Frog that's connecting or is making a profitable attack every turn, then they're getting a card ahead and they're pushing damage, and that's, core to their game plan. If they don't have that, then you are the one who, is maybe leading the game. If you have any sort of productivity in the board, if maybe you have an Ocelot Pride or even just like some cat tokens, you're playing Boros, you're ahead in that sense because they can't effectively, you know, move the game in their direction. So I think that when you're coming to like assessing the board, right, thinking about where does the flow of this game go, is a question that I ask myself a good bit when I'm trying to maybe determine should I, go with play A or play B based on what's in my hand, and what are the outcomes of those? Where does that leave the game afterwards?
I also think that like what you said applies to more than, I mean, like you said, Frog is an easy one, but if you think about like, I think blue white control is not really a deck in modern anymore, but like you think about like historic blue white control, they might play a thing to end the game, right, or a couple of things to end the game, right, and assessing like when is it time to deploy, when is it time to change, and like when do I think what you said actually is really pivotal in this. Like you can deploy your thing and still not pivot. Like you can say like you can play a Thragtusk and not attack with it. Like that Thragtusk is really good at attacking. It's really good at blocking. There are so many people that have no idea what card I'm talking about. But you can individualize a moment and say, hey, this thing is really good at both things, but I'm actually better at prolonging the game and pivoting later. Like dragging out the game actually gives me more advantage than trying to close the door now. And the question becomes, where do I do it?
Yeah, and I think even to take the example from from modern into standard, I think about like Dimir Midrange as a deck that has relied on Enduring Curiosity to be its card that really turns the corner. I think that's a phrase that gets used a lot when players have pivoted their role, right? They're turning the corner on the game, and now they're running away with it, and it's theirs to win. Like that turn that maybe they cast Enduring Curiosity with two attackers in play, and maybe make a good block, or force a removal spell to be spent on it. But they wind up untapping with now a source of card advantage, and maybe a board at parity otherwise. That takes it from, okay, we're kind of both jockeying for position here, we're both kind of trying to exchange resources to get ahead, to now I'm making a decisive play that says I'm going to continue to go further and further ahead, and I'm going to be attacking, right? I'm going to keep on drawing cards and hoping that trading the resources from here is gonna take the game the rest of the way. Or like ninjutsuing a Kaido on turn 3 says like, okay, now I'm going to be massively ahead from this tempo swing, right? Those are plays in standard that can kind of dictate that, and whether or not to make that decision can depend on the context of the board, right? Maybe ninjutsuing your Kaido on like turn 5 is better because then you can actually defend it from the creatures they have in play, because you'll have a removal spell in hand. Maybe you weren't able to do that before. You're worried they might have an answer that you can't interact with, but if you wait a little bit longer, that'll be the right time to make that play that really changes the flow of the game. And I think that when we talk about pivoting from an assessed role, right, it's almost about making that decision and saying, going all in on that being your choice. I think that it's pretty common in games of Magic, for especially these days, for kind of the advantaged player to stay advantaged. That's why being on the play can be so important, is because it gives you that first opportunity to be ahead. It's not often that you'll make a play to kind of try to swing things all the way in your favor, that then it winds up being swung back after a couple of turns of that. Which means it's really important in a game to make sure you're making that decision at the right time, right? That it's a decisive act of saying, okay, I'm going to change from kind of, I'm using fighting game terms, something I know that you're familiar with, Spencer, and I've talked about a bit on the show as well, like going from saying we're at neutral and we're kind of feeling each other out and just making plays into the board to develop things ourselves, when we're choosing to take actions that are looking to, jockey for control and have initiative be ours in the game. I think about that a lot when I play.
I really, sorry, I'm just like digesting what you said there, and I also think that, kind of this idea of maybe there's this flow that you talked about that it's not defined. Like you are favored or not favored to start something. You are, and then you are advantaged to press your advantage, if that makes sense. Like it is better for you to keep pushing to punish them for not getting there than to go backwards, right? Like to take a step back. And that is very fighting game for what it's worth. Like you are very advantaged to just keep going. Whether it's no matter what type of fighter it is, like you are uniquely positioned to take advantage of being in an advantage all the time. And
yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting, like that statement, because a lot of this has to do with like traditional matchup. Like when you are playing normal, when we say normal, right? Like mid-rangey, aggressive, control, like the kind of stereotypical, this looks like a normal game of Magic, like maybe something even akin to limited. I think all this is like kind of very true. And it also depends like what kind of deck are you, right? Are you a deck with counter spells? Because, if you use Dimir midrange, for example, like one of the ways we actually see people lose a lot is not realize that they have pivoted to a role where they have enough momentum on somebody, and the way they actually apply pressure is not lowering the shields, right? They hold up their Phantom Interference for the rest of the game, and now the opponent can never play their game-winning card, right? I think we see this in Modern a lot, where you'll see Frog players get this huge lead and they feel like they can't lose, and they'll tap down to one counter spell, because they'll like lose something. They're like, yeah, I still have one up, and they get double spelled on, and the opponent catches up, right? And suddenly now the game gets completely blown. So it's interesting how, like, when you're speaking about pushing your advantage, sometimes pushing is the act of not even doing, right? It's just sort of being like, hey, this is the status quo, and I'm going to prevent you from developing your board state further via, a counter spell or a kill spell of some sort. And now you can't really get anything else going. And so, like, when talking about that there, Spencer, thinking about it, like, from a fighting game standpoint, it's a lot like you don't want to give your opponent opportunity to use their like gauge bar in Street Fighter.
Yeah.
Right. Like if your opponent has an ability to use their ultimate on you, well, a great way to not lose the game is to, respect the ultimate.
I think that what you just talked about is kind of the next point is you made a decision. Like you've assessed that this is the thing. And pivoting doesn't have to be aggressive or defensive to aggressive. It can be aggressive to defensive. It could be hold my advantage, right? It doesn't have to be gain or push my advantage. It can be like, I have gained an advantage here. Now I'm going to play games so that my opponent can't take it back. And I think that that's something that maybe we don't recognize a lot in Magic, because we're so constantly obsessed with like, I'm the beatdown, they're the beatdown, I need to attack with my Hornlock Whale, or whatever it is, that we kind of missed like, okay, but like what if I just don't? Like what if the game is better if I just play this out for 3 turns? What if that advantages me? And I think that's what you were just saying, Mason, of like, no, it's fine if you want to like duress me off your top deck, or do whatever, because like the end of the day, like this board advantages me and you don't have the material to come back from this, or I will constantly gain material that will help me.
Yeah, it's sometimes pressing your advantage means not giving them a chance to use their cards effectively, right? Like I think board wipes are the easiest example to explain to this. If I have lethal through 1 kill spell on board already, right? Like let's say I had 5 2/2s and you're at 6. All right, well, it's gonna be really hard for you to 1-for-1 me. So me playing my 6 2/2 is not a very good play, right? I'm just playing into Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God, whatever you have. Okay, so pressing my advantage is actually knowing that I like don't need to develop this. I have enough of a lead, and I'm going to force you to have a ton of spot removal or this Wrath, and I'm going to be able to follow up, right? I think some players, when they think about like pressing their advantage, it's using all of their mana all the time and casting all their spells. But sometimes it's knowing you can afford not to do this. You have an advantage, and you can give up a little bit of like perceived use of material in order to actually get more out of your material.
Yeah, this is actually a lesson that I learned from Jonathan Sakanik when we were playing. He was like showing me how he played his like 4-color control deck back in 2014, and it had a copy of Gideon Jur. And for those not familiar, because this card is a Planeswalker from Rise of Eldrazi that I don't think anyone's talked about in forever. It's a 5 mana.
It was like $50, so it was.
I mean, it was a banger because it does this. So it's a 5 mana Planeswalker with 6 loyalty, +2. All of your opponent's stuff has to attack it. If it can, it's attacking Gideon. So it goes up to 8. So you got to deal 8 damage to it on that turn to kill it on turn 5. Unheard of in that era. There's a card from Rise of Eldrazi. Creature's not that big. -2, destroy a tap creature. And then 0 becomes a 6/6 that prevents all damage that would be dealt to it. So I remember vividly, I was playing against an Abzan mid-range deck. Like, Thoughtseize, Path to Exile, the Fatal Push at the time, Tarmogoyf, maybe even Scavenging Ooze. There's like a pile of.
So not standard. We're not talking about
standard. No, I'm talking about in modern.
Okay, all right.
And I was talking about, I think this turn I'm gonna animate and attack. I've got counter spells to protect my Gideon, and I've got like 3 cards to their 2 cards. Like, it should be fine. And he just goes, "Why attack? Why not just plus?" And I'm like, "Well, he doesn't have any creatures." And I'm like, "Well, then why not just plus? Every turn you plus, they're not gonna have any. Maybe they have 1 Maelstrom Pulse in their deck. They're not gonna be able to kill this thing. Just plus it till it's like at 20 loyalty, and then eventually what'll happen is, you'll use all of your other cards to run them out of things, and they still won't be able to beat it." And like, that was a perfect example to me of I'm pressing the advantage that I have of Gideon to gain the resource that I needed, which was I should just be drawing cards and continuing to hit land drops and invalidating all of the cards that they could play, right? All of their Tarmogoyfs don't really do anything because they just deal, like 6 damage to my Gideon because they attack it and then I minus and then it's dead. Or maybe a Dark Confidant even. Like, none of it really does anything. And I'm able to sit there and draw cards and be selective in what I'm using my resources on. That advantage is me. And so even though I wasn't trying to win the game, I think it's like a pretty common early lesson to learn of playing Control is like, you don't need to win the game, right? Like, the game will kind of win itself. And that's a great example of it, right? Is like you understanding where you're ahead so that you can continue to do the things that make it so you can't lose the game, be it that you're plussing your Teferi Hero of Dominaria or Jace the Mind, right? Brainstorming through Jace the Mind Sculptor every turn, or whatever it is over the years, like pressing that advantage of what you do have, right? It's kind of hard to talk about in finite terms because there's so many different ways to win a game of Magic that it's important to understand where you're ahead and how you're winning so that you can know when you're pressing that right advantage.
I think there are 2 things here. 1, Jonathan, come back on the podcast. We'd love to have you. So, shout out. 2, like, I think that this is what Mason and I just talked about, where it's not the pivot and the making of the decision happens not at the same time for every deck, and not at the same time for every matchup, and not at the same time for everything. And that's why this is such a complex topic, is because you're like, well, I can just pivot now. I can just start attacking with this Gideon. It's like, well, what if I don't? What if I just draw 7 more cards and negate everything my opponent does, and then just solidify the ending? And I think that there's a balance there that I want to talk about. I actually think it was on this podcast that Jesse talked about not missing your pivot turn, or not letting it go a turn too late, and how you're probably supposed to start attacking a turn early, And that's in like a pretty normal match of Magic outside of the realm of what we just talked about. But I do think it's important of like you probably want to hang on to some kind of advantage longer than you need to before you would rather end the game. And that's really interesting, especially in a world where like draws happen and like, you know, you're playing these decks that we're talking about. Mason, how do you not wait yourself out of a win?
I mean, I think it's important as an aside to like constantly every turn at the beginning of it ask like, what does winning the game for me look like from here? What does it look like for them and kind of moving forward? And so I think if you work that into it, that will help with both pivoting, but also not missing this opportunity Spencer was talking about, right? You're kind of constantly thinking about what am I supposed to be winning? What does it look like from here? You can kind of assess there. I think the other one too is also making sure like in the same way of not missing the opportunity, not going too early too, right? It's sort of like, okay, it's time to win and not being emotional about it, right? Not being like so caught up in like, oh, I don't want to lose the game. So I'm going to hold. And the other way, it's like, oh, I don't want to win too. Like, I'm so excited to win. Let's go for it now when it's maybe not the best. So I think kind of being a little bit more taking a step back and thinking about what does it look like from here? How advantage am I? Okay, is this the time to really get things going? And if, you know, like you mentioned before from the quote, like, if I think I maybe should start attacking last turn, it's probably still pretty good to attack this turn unless something's dramatically changed.
Was that a shot at me for BBT 25? I know it wasn't, but
I have no idea what you're talking about.
That's good. I knew you didn't. I just thought it was funny. I just had a whole conversation with like multiple people about PT 20, the Team Pro Tour, and me losing in the finals of an what were they called? RPTQ?
Yep. RPTQ spec.
Yeah, where my opponent played a Chandra and I tapped out to play a Lyra because they only had 2 outs in their whole deck and I would be able to win from there, and they drew it. And I didn't need to do that and all this stuff. And what Mason's talking about, like if I had just waited a couple turns, we've never agreed on whether I'm supposed to close the door or kind of play. But had I done what Mason just said, where I wait, my team would have gone to the Pro Tour. I would have been there with my team, and I would have had the craziest, maybe the craziest RPTQ win of anyone in that tournament because of who we played against, but because we went to Denver and like played against everyone. But yeah, I think about this a lot because of this and like understanding pivotal turns. And I don't just mean pivoting turns, I mean pivotal turns. And understanding like when do you close the door and what does the door even look like? If you have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Mason said in those kind of questions of asking like, okay, what does the game look like when I win? What does the game look like when my opponent wins from here? You know, that is an important question to ask, because having those answers of what is it that I'm working towards and what is it my opponent's working towards kind of gives you a sense of who's closer, right? Going back to the example I gave about Gideon against that Abzan midrange deck, that's the determination that, you know, I came to understanding was correct, because I knew that, okay, who's drawing better cards? Well, this Gideon says a bunch of cards in my opponent's deck don't do anything. Their discard spells don't do anything, so they don't answer the Gideon. They have maybe one card that matters, and I will draw a bunch of cards that matter, because all of my cards answer their cards. So that means that this is the right course of action. What the game looks like for them winning involves getting this Gideon off the table. So zeroing it gives them an opportunity to do that. I just shouldn't do it, right? I should just make sure that I'm focusing on my game plan. Now, there are plenty of times where, you know, you look at your hand and you say, well, maybe it's not the right time for me to do it, or maybe their deck is different and they're a combo deck, and I need to actually focus on maybe I'm playing a deck like Tron even, and they had a bunch of cards they could draw that are better than my Gideon, and I need to kill them before they draw one of those things that just absolutely trumps what I do, right? That point of inevitability we started from of like, sure, it's great that I'm doing this thing and I'm gaining advantage, but they have things that completely undo that. So how do I make sure that I'm able to beat that? And what does that say about my role? What does it look like for me to win this game? Well, it probably looks like me starting to attack to close the door because I can't afford to wait. Right? That's where it starts to be really, really contextual. Maybe your hand is maybe you're playing control, but you've been plussing your Teferi and it's been taking maybe a hit from a small creature, and like, well, should I, try to start doing things, or should I be leaving up my mana? Well, it's like, well, if I don't have any counter spells and my hand is all lands, well, I probably need to do something. I can't just sit here and hope that nothing bad happens. I should take a line that maybe isn't the most conservative. I shouldn't just leave up my mana and hope that I can counter something, or maybe like have my spell line up a bit better. Maybe I need to protect what I have in order to make it to a future turn where I'm still ahead, right? Like understanding, and that's where I think a lot of, technical play is the most valuable skill, is because if you're able to frame the question the right way with your role assessment, and then kind of either intuit or run the numbers in your head, or do whatever calculus feels best for you on what does that mean about the play I make this turn to have the highest likelihood of winning the game. That is so important. If you don't if you miss the window, every turn after that, you've lowered your probability of winning the game, right? You are giving edge back to your opponent by not making that play at the correct time, or not having done the correct evaluation of the situation to say, I should, try to turn the corner here or start to close the game, or I should wait a little bit longer because I think that it favors me, and by how much, right? There's all those calculations that go into the decision you make. But the important thing is setting yourself up and understanding how to make that decision. And I think that, kind of between Mason's point of those questions to ask yourself, and even your example, Spencer, right? Like, you can't know, but sure, maybe them having one of two outs to your Lyra.
No,
whether that's more likely than whatever the combination of things that would need to happen for you to lose if you waited, right? I don't know what the situation was, but if you have if you are able to wait and still think that maybe that's more likely to win than banking on them not having the 5 or 10% chance they have this card right then on that turn, that might have been the more optimal decision, or not. It sounds like you haven't come to an agreement on it over all these years, so I'm not going to say that I know. But it's important to know that that's kind of the mental equation that you're doing.
I think that what Mason said is kind of the closing point of, in a lot of ways, Mason, where you're saying you need to make a decision at some point, but you need your decision to fall into a line that is profitable, right? Like, it's not like maybe the reason that the six of us that have talked about this in ad nauseum for myself is is it better to take the 84% play, or better to drag it out to try to get it to a whatever play? But closing the door eventually needs to happen. You need to decide when it happens and how it happens. And I think that what you said of you know what your board is, you know what the turns are, and now you need to assess from there and decide okay, now I've done this, I've made my decision, and there's kind of no going back, right?
Yeah, assuming you're in the final turns of a game, yeah, you make your choice and you have to kind of live with it. And I think that in general, it's not always true, but you should really just try to focus on what makes sense in the moment. Very much like mulliganing, right? When we mulligan, we don't really ever tell you to look at the top cards of your deck because it doesn't matter. It was either a good mulligan decision or a bad mulligan decision. If you're looking at the top cards, it probably means you deemed it was a bad mulligan. And that often, people look at it when it's like low lands, or maybe you have like 5 lands, and it's like you look at the top of your deck and it's exactly what you needed. That doesn't make your decision wrong, right? What really matters is the process and how you came about that, and like, should I have turned the corner yet or should I not, right? Like, if Spencer was like a client of mine, he was like, man, this has been weighing on me for years, da 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 da. We would probably talk about like, well, do you think that you in the moment thought about it? Or do you think you thought, I'm going to be the hero and we're going to go to the Pro Tour? Right. And like, no matter what happens, right, like, you have to kind of live with that in the moment. And the real reflections are sort of like, I'm being I'm joking around with my friend there. I think Spencer thought this was the right play. It sounds like there's a lot of ways where it goes really, really well for him. And it sounds like you made a play that was very high percentage to close the door out against a strong opponent and go to the Pro Tour. And that's a play that's respectable. Whether that's the right or the wrong play, we don't have all the information right now, et cetera, et cetera. We could totally talk for a long time as you go to lots of plays about what's good or bad here. But we made a decision, and sort of what was our thought process behind it. That's what I'm really always interested in. Less, did this play win or lose, and more, did I have good reasoning for this play? And to me, Spencer, I don't know I know we talked about this back when it happened, and I don't remember exactly where I landed on it, but listening to it now, it sounds like you had a spot against a strong opponent to get a huge lead and basically turn your 80% into a 95. And you could have potentially held up your mana and had a situation that was like maybe 90, right? So you lose 5 percentage points, whatever. But no matter what, you had a process behind it. And that's kind of like, I think, where like listeners should really take away from everything we talked about here, which is like, have intentionality with your play, think about what you're doing, and have a game plan, and be willing to change that game plan if the game goes sideways. Yeah, maybe normally you're a control deck that takes forever to win the game, but maybe your opponent stumbles on lands, you slam the Wandering Emperor, and you start making samurais, and you start countering spells you normally wouldn't counter. They're cut down in that samurai, and you're like, well, I got lethal next turn if I cast No More Lies here, so I'm going to cast No More Lies. Even though if I told you in the abstract, like, hey, this is happening, what would you do? You'd be like, who cares? So, like, let them cut my samurai down.
I think that Abe's like really early example of like just figuring out like the individual thing that matters right now and bringing it down to its basics with his Jeskai deck is kind of the key to this. And there are some decks that do this a lot, right? You have mid-range and control decks that do this a lot. You have aggro decks that like but I think that like one of the things that's really cool is like when you play Nagromir and you understand those turns, it unlocks like a part of your game that you just wouldn't get if you don't understand this. And that's to me like the crazy part of this concept that maybe we probably could have spent like 10 more minutes on it, but like, you're not always going to be a control deck versus mid-range versus aggro versus and understanding like, how does my hand line up? How does like all the things that we talked about, it will line up where you have to do that thing where you constantly assess, and closing that door will be really pivotal in those moments. Like understanding where, all right, like they can kill my 2 things, but like I deal them 6 damage over 2 turns, and like that's the type of thing you have to understand to win those games of Magic. And you can't be lazy about it, right? Like it can't just be your basic matchup knowledge or your basic hand keeping, these things that we preach on this podcast all the time. You actually have to do the work of like, what does the game look like and how do I win, which is what Mason just said. So anything else you guys want to say before we go on?
I'm ready to pivot to the back half of the show.
Oh yeah. That was a good segue, Mason. You can check out our sponsors at untap.gg. I used them this week for my first draft. They are really great for it. If you use the link in the show notes, we get a kickback. We really appreciate all of it. And honestly, like, if you're using Arena and don't have this, you really should. It really is that great. And we really appreciate them. Mana Traders, you just go to CCMTG5 right now at checkout, or use the link in the description. They're the best card rental service. I won't speak badly about other ones, but they just really crush it. So check them out. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/CCMTG like Micah did. Micah's our newest patron of $5 or more, giving them access to the Patreon Discord, as well as the Patreon question, which is what this week, Abe?
This week, Tobin Frost asks, I don't have the ability to get 4 Vivi and 4 Agatha's Soul Cauldron. How should I approach standard RCQ season?
Yes, you're gonna want to go to a Walmart. You're gonna get probably like a handgun. That's probably the best. No, I'm just kidding. That's the yeah. This is an interesting.
That was a bad joke.
A little robbery among friends. A
little robbery.
Yeah, that's the best way to get the VVs is to go to your LGS and get some VV.
I hate to break it to you guys, but Walmart doesn't have the packs either. Like, the scalpers are out there. There's no packs at Walmart.
But
you need to get the gun to go take to the scalpers.
Oh, got it. There's a process.
The gun will get us where we need to go. It's just a lack of ingenuity on y'all's part if the gun doesn't get there. No, but enough of this gun. Hey, for our international listeners, in America we joke like this. You know, that's how we cope with the violence. Anyways, so I think this is an interesting one because I am of the opinion currently, I don't know how you all feel, and I don't even think it really matters this question, that the VV stuff is probably one of the best decks. I don't know if you should be playing 4 Cauldrons or playing like the lighter build, but I think the VV and surrounding cards are currently my front runner if I was playing a tournament, you know, for like my homies' lives tomorrow. That being said, I think you can very easily win an RCQ with lots of different decks in standard right now. I don't feel we're at a point where it is like, you know, Underworld Breach, Nadu type stuff where it's just like, you're giving up miles and miles of like, you know, runway by not playing these decks. And I think like, you know, a person who's playing Dimir mid-range incredibly well is, you know, just as likely to win as someone who's playing VV, you know, mediocrely or whatever. Right. And so I think you can still get there on not the best deck, quote unquote.
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I have a positive win percentage with Dimir against blue-red, and then a positive win percentage against Dimir with my deck, which is teamer prowess. It is VV Cauldron, and I think that my answer to this is that there isn't the good monocolor deck that like gets you in for cheap in this format. Which kind of
don't
sucks.
like the green deck.
No, I think that deck's really bad against Dimir.
Okay, that's fair.
I
have a secret thought that I think that deck's good. We just have it built wrong. I'm trying to play against.
Dude, I could listen. I'm
not saying I know how to fix. I'm just saying,
I don't know how to fix it either. I'm just saying it's bad against Dimir. Like I think it is. I
think having a bad, it's not like disqualifying. But I get what you're saying.
No, that's okay. I'll talk about it for a second. We had a podcast listener and a patron that said they can't beat the green deck. And I jokingly posted a screenshot of a really bad hand from Dimir that beat the green deck. And we've talked about, I mean, I've tried to talk about it since then, but like, I just think the like Tidebinder Mage and removal and like all this stuff is like a lot for that deck to overcome. And for me, like, what would I be trying to do here comes down to like, okay, can I build something that has some of the same cards that maybe isn't a Cauldron deck. I will post my personal blue-red deck that I do believe is very good. That is a Monument deck rather than a VV Cauldron deck. That I believe could totally win your RCQ. I think that sometimes you need to think outside the box, and we're really early in the format, and you can't give up on like this is not a 2-deck format. Like, I've played a lot of this format. I promise you, as long as you're not playing Yuna, you're probably playing a good deck. You're probably good. So,
Yeah, I said this last week, which is that there is a Spotlight series that will happen soon. And I'm just not one to believe that how the metagame looks based off of a few standard challenges is going to be how it looks after a large paper tournament. And also, I don't even believe that the only decks in the format that are competitive involve playing VV or Agathys. I mean, Dimir is still a very, solid deck. Definitely wins RCQs. The red decks are still out there. They're still playable. There's some there are definitely other things you can do in the format than that and still win an RCQ. I would say, approaching the standard RCQ season is learning to play decks that aren't VV Cauldron, right? Like, just accept if you're saying, okay, I'm going to play this entire standard season without playing these decks, then just start from there. Don't worry about what you can't do. Worry about what you can.
What did you say,
I'm not buying VVs. You're gonna not. That's not happening. I'm not spending how much ever. No, I could buy a house before I can buy VVs. And so
can I sell my VVs for a house?
I'll trade you. So
that deck is really expensive. I've actually worried about it as I've been okay, here's the deck that I'm gonna play at this RCQ. I gotta borrow this deck from somebody. It's a
lot. It's a lot of money. And you know what? My game plan currently, I got Esper Pixie queued up. I got all those cards.
Dude, I don't think that Orzhov Pixie is that bad. It has some weaknesses, but come on, it's got really good mana.
Are you saying why not play Orzhov over Esper?
No, I wasn't disparaging your pick. I just meant there are good cards in the Pixie decks. Maybe Tiny Bones isn't it, but we can still figure
Tiny Bones is never it, but you definitely can't. and here's the thing that really matters too, right? Why? And this is a hypothetical. Which would you rather have? Would you rather play as well as Javier Dominguez on the day, or have a VV Cauldron deck? Right? I would rather play as well as Javier Dominguez on the day versus basically every deck that isn't Nadu type breach level stuff. You know what I mean? And I think if you can just focus on what you're able to play that is reasonable and good, and focus on your fundamentals and playing the matchups as best you can, that will go so much further than worrying about oh, I don't have VV Cauldron type stuff. Yeah, those cards are really good. I don't want to undersell it. That I think those cards are powerful. I would gladly play those cards if I could, but I don't really want to do that. I don't want to spend the money on those kind of cards right now, so I'm not going to. But I still think I'm very likely to win an RCQ. I don't think it's oh, I'm a huge dog now that I'm not playing VV Cauldron.
Yeah, I should also mention I will probably have VVs and Cauldrons in my first standard RCQ. I'm not pretending that I won't, but I don't know. There's a chance that I just play blue black Abe said. I don't know. Nothing's
just don't get too lost in the Moto copy paste sauce. I don't know, the first time a deck has multiple players whose usernames you recognize, 3 or 4 of them playing a similar archetype in top 8, of course the next 2 or 3 challenges are going to be a lot of people playing that same deck. Just don't the sky's not falling.
2 weeks ago when
Stainer's in 5-0 with Jund Dinosaurs today. I just looked it up.
I was just gonna say 2 weeks ago when we recorded, Mason at the end of the episode, Didn't you say, because this is when we apparently record when stuff gets posted? Didn't you say like 100% of the decks were Dimir?
Well, it was one, but yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, that's 100%, Mason. It sounds better that way. You gotta fit the narrative. No, really good question, Tobin. I really appreciate it. Let's talk about always improving. Always improving is the point of the podcast. Every week we're trying to get better today than we were yesterday. Mason, what have you done to be always improving at life or Magic in general?
So I had a great always improving moment come up at this Pauper event, and this is actually a streamed game. So you can go and you can watch this moment and see how you would play it out. I was the feature match in round 3 of this Pauper 2K. We had like 66 people show up for the event. It was awesome. And I started off undefeated, boys. And, you know, I did some Pauper practice, but I don't know all the decks. And I'm playing the Writhing Chrysalis deck, and I play against Mono Balloon Ninjas, I guess is the name of the deck. Some people told me it's fairies. I don't really know. I'm not down with the vernacular. But basically, it's counter spells, it's flying men, and it's ninjas to draw cards. That's the whole deck. And
that's that's an old deck.
Yeah, and I even played against it on Moto, but I don't know all the cards. And it is like different counter spells. Like apparently this guy was on a bunch of annuls, and not everyone was on a bunch of annuls before. They were on like Sinister Sabotage or something like that. Anyways, there's a lot of variations and stuff, but I know generally what I'm playing against. I'm playing against a counterspell tempo deck. I've played Magic for years. I can do this. Game 1, I get rolled a little bit. You know, it happens. He's on the play. Game 2, play out of my mind. You should go watch it. One of the hypest moments I've had in a while happens on there. Then game 3 is a very interesting sort of hand, a thing to talk about here. And this is the always improving moment. I open my opening hand and I have a mountain. I have a fetch land. And if you haven't played Pauper, the fetch lands there are like, search your deck for a tapped basic of like a triome color. So all mine get Jund colors, or it taps for a colorless. And I've got like an Ichor Wellspring. I've got a Galvanic Blast. I've got 2 cast downs, which are basically Doomblade variants. And I've got a Writhing Chrysalis. And I'm on the draw. And I'm like, all right, this hand's a little slow, but my opponent's game plan is probably going to be play a 1-drop on 1, ninja it, I'll Gal Blast, I'll fetch my tap black. Then I'll have a bunch of, cut downs and stuff, and I have some redraws. And I just need the ninjas not to hit me. I'm going to play a long game. I'm fine playing a long game. So turn 1, my opponent goes Island Go. Heck yeah, we're feeling over the moon. I draw my 1 Crack Clan Shaman, which is this 1 mana 1/1. It's in my deck because I couldn't cut it. I didn't have enough cards to bring in. I had 1 in my deck to kill some ninjas. Notably, what did I say before in my game planning, guys? Kill the ninjas. I'm like, well, I'll play this on turn 1. My opponent doesn't have any of the flash flyers that I've seen so far. They got a ninja, but I'll put this into play. I put into play, pass, nothing happens. They go land for turn, pass. All right, I draw for turn. It's another Ichor Wellspring. And I do a bad job of today's episode. And I think about pivoting the plan. Because now I've drawn second Ichor Wellspring. If my opponent counters this Ichor Wellspring, it's not the end of the world, right? This is like a totally fine thing that can happen. I have another one the next turn. And yeah, I don't get to go get my black, but it's okay. I've got my Crack Land. So I attack with my Shaman, see if they flash into the little ninja I saw before. They don't. Cool. And I play my Ichor Wellspring. They counterspell. All dandy or whatever. My opponent then goes like 3rd land, play a fairy, pass. And this is where I mess up. I draw, and I'm like, I draw another Writhing Chrysalis. And now I'm like, I drew another 4-drop, and I've let my game plan, I've pivoted a little, but I could still do the original plan. I can still interact. But instead I'm going, well, I should just play this, Ichor Wellspring. It's not the end of the world if this gets countered, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And then my opponent flashes in Spellstutter Sprite. They counter my Ichor Wellspring. And now they have 2 flying creatures and a good amount of pressure versus my little 1/1 that could hit them.
I could see Abe's face. And before you said it, he knew what was happening. And he doesn't play Pauper. He knew exactly what
I'm familiar with the old texts.
Yeah. And so I get kind of got. But imagine, even though I pivoted a little bit, imagine if I just reassess, right? And I just kind of play with my Gal Blast up. I fetch my swamps. I interact a little bit. I don't kind of get run over. My opponent doesn't even have some ninjas. They kept a very reactive, heavy sideboard card hand, which I could have definitely intuited as well from the first 2 turns. my opponent's on the play with the tempo deck and didn't do anything. So where I think this is a great always improving moment is I think drawing the shaman and playing the shaman is right. I like that play upon reflecting, upon watching, upon thinking. That's a good pivot from holding up my Galvblast. The next turn, though, when I give them the opportunity to use their mana, when I give them an opportunity to kind of get the ninja down potentially and not develop my colored mana is where I get got. And the game ends up lasting 5 or 6 turns. I draw a third land like on like the last turn of the game or whatever, basically. And I'm basically checkmated. I can't really get out of the situation. But I think had I just played a longer game and tried to make my land drops, realized my opponent's hand's full of interaction, and just dedicated myself to the, hey, I'm going to kill ninjas plan, I probably at least by 3-4 more turns from that game from not getting hit by Spellstutter Sprites and then not having them ninjas and having to fight through them. And so it was a great always improving moment of, hey, you know, like do what we talked about in today's episode of pivoting, adapting, and thinking about stuff, and think also about what my opponent's plays mean. I felt really great about my play this weekend. It was awesome to get back and play that event. I had a lot of fun at the Common Ground Guys Cup. It was a good time, and that was like kind of the one turn sequence where I feel like I really phoned it in, and I got punished accordingly, which was great. And so that was my always improving moment from this week. And you can check that out on the YouTube channel. That video is up there, and I do have some very sick plays in game number 2, and it was a great match. So I highly suggest checking it out.
I love that one. You hearing me miss Popper there, Mason. Abe, what about you?
I do just want to say that you just have to sack that, Mason.
Yeah,
Mason,
yeah.
you got to get the swamp.
Yeah,
I was thinking that too. For what it's worth. I know we don't need to pile on him though. He already said it.
Yeah,
he already said it.
Yeah, but I want past Mason to have won.
yeah.
That's so wrong.
Well, he knows he needs the swamp to play the game. Like we don't need to pile on.
You also have seen me play against the Walls deck, by the way. I read every card and I duress them at one point, and they have all these cards that I have no idea what they're for, but I can tell that some are combo and some are enablers. So on a piece of paper, I wrote 2 combo pieces, and I wrote their mana value, and then I wrote enablers, and I wrote their mana value because I didn't know their names. And so my opponent would like cast like some card, and I was like -1 in the green. I won that game very easily, but it was like a really long game because I had to read every card.
Do you write with, just out of curiosity, do you have like a pad, or do you write with pen and paper?
All right, so this is the biggest BS narrative of all time, but I can't get over it. I cannot play Tournament Magic with a boogie board. I, for some reason, just always fail to lock in. It has to be pen and paper. F&M type stuff, I can boogie board it, but I feel myself not locked in. I don't know what it is. It's all in my head. It's always pen and paper.
I don't think it's in your head. I've considered switching back off the boogie board. This is like so far off topic, but I think it's worth talking about on the podcast.
I think we're all coping. I can't think of
No. Hold on.
Because
you have to erase your life total at some point so often in modern matches that it's great. Like there's so many life changes that at some point I'll be like, do we agree on the life total? Is it this? Like I promise, and I don't write very big. And then like you're like, okay, but like what else did I have written down and blah blah blah. I guess the new boogie boards are legal where you can like save notes because they're visible to both people or whatever with the new rules. But I don't know. I might go back to pen and paper.
I'm just gonna say, and you can call me crazy if you want, but did you or did you not spend most of your childhood attending classes and taking notes with pen and paper?
I didn't take notes.
I have a writing disability.
Did you write I also do. What are you talking about?
I didn't take any notes.
I'm just saying there is something very tactile about like actual.
Oh no, there's the reason that the iPad Pro went viral, right? Like the idea that you could just write things on your iPad and it would save them as like text files was like huge.
Yeah, but like I'm just saying, even as far as like my brain engaging, like if you give me a boogie board, not the same.
Oh, I talk about this in coaching all the time. It is the same for what it's worth for your brain, but anyway, that's your
maybe for your brain.
No, that's not
but
how
not
it works.
No, that is how it works.
No,
our brains can be different.
Your brain doesn't process what you're writing on differently.
Well,
That's literally
kinda
what I was
depends on
saying. Is that I feel differently writing with a
Alright.
stylus versus writing something
Oh,
down.
I see. The thing in your hand is what's mattering.
The thing in my hand, and also the tactile response of actually like pushing in and writing it compared to scribbling.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's like the only thing I can reason that's different is what Abe's describing, where like it feels different when I take the pen and I push it against paper. Like a thing I noticed is I feel weird when it's just a sheet of paper handed to me. When it's like a notepad. And what I have is back when I worked on Image 3, I got a bunch of those D&D binders that like, they even way at stores too,
Yeah.
it's like paper with little card holders. I've got like 30 of them and I've worked through
Can
like
I-
two.
Mason,
want some?
can I get some of those from you next
Yeah,
time we're in
dog.
the same place? Because I've been using one since the pandemic, and I'm close to running out.
I
got
that
you.
one.
I,
was like,
I'll take a
this is
picture.
I can't believe we went down this rabbit hole, but like when I moved, just like the last move, I finally threw out some of like the end of like the CCMTG era team deck lists like notebooks, where like there were deck lists from like Pro Tour testing and like and life pads of Pro Tour testing and like my wife and I would go to like, this is so funny. We would go to like Office Max and like get like, one for every person. They could write down their deck lists in there. They could write down their stuff, and like we would use that and stuff like that. And then we would keep them in the house, and like they could use them again for the next Pro Tour and stuff. We finally threw them all out, and you guys are making me remember all of that.
You can never get me to throw that out.
I'm
more likely to make a shrine to those things than get rid of them.
Dude.
They probably take a bunch of space. If you have everyone else's,
Yeah,
like
I had like 8 people's in my house, so
yeah, you should. I would just give it to them. I would just be like,
wow, I'm not gonna. They don't live here anymore. Like,
mail it to them.
it's
Merry
just-
Christmas. Anyway, my always improved moment this week. Now that we spent enough time on that, actually comes from something I did at work this week, which was I had a meeting with someone who is a health and wellness coach. And part of what I do, for those who are not familiar with me and my work, is I'm the branch manager of a bank branch, which means that I spend a lot of time talking to business owners and business people about what they do so that I can try to get them to use our banking products and services, or if they're clients of mine already, so I can make sure I can kind of, grease the wheels for them and make connections between my clients and them. So having one of these conversations with a health and wellness coach who was talking about, his process and coaching, and it's something that we were able to connect over because I also do some amount of coaching, just in a different space. And he was talking about his process, and he has this like 3-step way that he like handles an appointment. And one is like step 1 is just understanding the client's goals. What is it they're trying to accomplish? In his case, because he's not necessarily like a physical trainer, just health and wellness. It's like maybe it touches on nutrition and like what does it look like for the client to be living a healthier lifestyle? Like what are their goals, and what does he know that he can connect them with and help them build a plan that works, right? How can he work with them to find something realistic? Then step 2 is something that I never really thought about, and like was really eye-opening to me in terms of how I do coaching for not only for Magic, but also with like my own staff and just generally, is like, what are the barriers that exist to the success of the items that we're laying out as your action plan, right? Like, what are the barriers and how are we removing them specifically? And it made me really stop and think about, what are the ways that I mean, first of all, this is something I maybe do unconsciously of like, is maybe asking like, is this realistic? Or, once the problem has arisen, saying, okay, well, what's getting in the way? But just from the outset, even with myself or with others, like taking the time to understand, okay, so this is what we want to do. What are the first like 3 things that are going to go wrong? Like I know myself and you know yourself, individual who I'm working with, what are those barriers in the way? So that then they can kind of be factored into making sure that things are actually attainable. And then when it comes to the third step, which is accountability, which is a lot of like tying back, right, either the follow-ups or whatever's like these are the things you're committing to, and this is what you're going to do over this time period for yourself. When you want to give up, like, I'm going to remind you that we're doing this thing, right? Maybe it's you're sticking to this diet because your goal is to get off of this hypertension medication, or your goal is to be able to, or in my world, it's your goal is to win an RCQ. It's like, well, if you're not willing to sit down and play matches and then reflect on them and actually do the VOD review and like be intentional, or sit down and do the research and write your own sideboard guide, right? If you're not willing to do these things, it's going to take longer, and it's not going to be as guaranteed you're going to reach your goal. But that piece in the middle of understanding what is going to go wrong first, I think for myself and for clients that I continue to work with, is going to be a big piece. It was just a big learning that I had of like, this is an even better way to approach what I already do, and to just work that into all of my processes. So
I've already told you that I think you'd be really good at my job, Abe. But this is like a huge part of like the discovery process of like, what are the barriers to entry for any given thing? And I think you and I have actually talked about this before, and it is part of what I do in my first coaching session. And people are like, Spencer, why is your first coaching session so boring? Like, why am I even paying for this? And it is because I'm like, where are the barriers to entry to get to where your goals are? Because your goals might not match where you're at and things like that. And I have a couple current people that were above the barrier to entry, and like we had to adjust what it looks like after that, where it's like, okay, well, you're above where I normally coach, like let's go from there, and things like that. But I agree. I think barriers to entry, something the software taught me is like reducing those gives you opportunities to gain information, because you can't gain the information if there are those barriers. And coaching, and in all honesty, Magic is the same thing. Like, if you don't know that like you're supposed to attack in a certain turn, how are you supposed to know X or Y? Like, how are you supposed to know roll? I mean, how are you supposed to know this? And Mason will probably talk about it ad nauseum because he coaches so much more than us. But like, if you don't know the small things, it's going to really hinder the big things.
And I mean, even like at a most basic level, if you don't already plan for things to fail, they're just going to fail to those things you could have planned around. And that was like the number one thing for me. I'm sure, like you said, Mason, I'm sure you have a lot that you could say. I don't know if you have anything you feel like you want to contribute.
Yeah, I think y'all said a lot of good things. One thing I would say, like along the idea of like the little to the big, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, or misunderstood, I should say. But I think that like so often where people get lost is the middle part, right? Like they have an idea for a short and long-term goal. Like a great example might be like, I want to, get to the point where I'm consistently topping RCQs is like a medium to short-term goal. And my long-term goal is I'd like to, play every RC in a year. Great goal. We know exactly there, but how do we like get to A to B, and understanding all these stuff that we're missing is a lot of time, I think, where we can come in and like as coaches to be helpful, but also like where the most confusion comes from. And so I guess I would say like, if you feel that way now, that's like a very common experience. One thing that I find from coaching is a lot of people express something like how relieving it is to kind of understand like they're on a path to kind of get somewhere, because you can feel very aimless when you're by yourself, and you don't have someone in your life who's done it before. I think, all of us have basically had a group of people we grew up with, or someone who like helped us on that journey, for like Abe, it's Sukinnick, for like me, it's Trey, right? And like having that person who had done it before and can sort of like hold your hand through the darkness, as it were, to get a little dramatic there. I didn't realize how dramatic I was when I was saying it. I think it really helps. And I think that, yeah, no, it's a very interesting topic. And I wonder almost if there's something to like a whole podcast episode about it, as my mind wanders a little while we're talking.
Put it in the doc. I'll go next. Thank you, Abe, for yours, by the way. I have focused a lot this week just on, with my wife's birthday and family stuff, of like continuing to build on momentum that I had built from like doing things right, like processes right, doing things in a certain way. And like, you know, the weekend, for example, was lost to me for like a multitude of reasons. But like coming back just as strong today in testing modern and like doing things where I guess the overarching thing is like a continuation of foundation, where just because you've started to build one and maybe you take a step back, but like you acknowledge the step back and then you immediately continue, is really hard and important to not let that step back become the catalyst for like falling apart. And I think I was 2 or 3 weeks ago where I talked about building a foundation for like what I can do in Magic right now and what Magic can be for me. And I really tried over the last 5 days, with multiple days missing, to be like, okay, what do I have time for? What does it look like for me? What can I try? What can I look at? What can I study? What can I read? And I think it's so easy to let things fall apart and just be like, well, maybe I can't do what I was doing. But it's like, no, I can. I just had, you know, things that were happening that got in the way. What can I continue to do? And I think that a continuation is an always improving moment just as much as developing something new. That is going to do it for this week. If you want to join the conversation, you can head over to patreon.com/ccmpg, become a patron. If you go into Patreon for $5 more, you get access to the Patreon Discord, just like our newest patron, Micah. Or you can join the public Discord, that's also in the show notes, and then leave a YouTube comment. We got some interesting ones the last couple weeks. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of these more training ground style episodes? These interesting ones, and you know, leave us a comment on the Twitter or the Threads or the Blue Sky. Like, comment, and review. Mason, where can people find you?
Find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. And find me at twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. If you want to reach out for coaching, you can via Twitter, where I just mentioned, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com, and put coaching in the description. Abe, what about you?
You can find me over on Blue Sky at More Nothings. You can also find me on Twitter, or if you're looking for coaching, DM me on either platform, or send me an email over at morenothings@gmail.com. Just put coaching in the description. How about you, Spencer?
You can find me every week on the Need to Nerd podcast. This week we did K-pop Demon Hunters. It was a very fun podcast. I have not since the movie Up came out, have I watched the movie 4 times in 4 days. Most of it was because of my kids, but that's okay. Very fun episode. Just obviously the most popular thing in the world right now, so you know, check it out. We didn't record an episode of Constructed Clash this week because Matt was at a Halo tournament. As just watching it, it was really cool to kind of hear from him. But we'll be back this week on the YouTube channel, and then you can follow me at Spencer30H everywhere except for Twitter, where you can follow me at He's a Game. And then you can follow the podcast everywhere at CCMTG or CCMTG Pod. And we'll see you guys all next week with a brand new episode of